Hello, I'm Adam Smith, and I'm now going to share with you my thoughts on the first text for this evening, which is Kate Atkinson's Behind the Scenes at the Museum, novel that came out in 1995, written by Kate Atkinson, as I say. If you live in York and you like literature, I think it's very likely that you've read this book and that you've enjoyed this book. I know that Kate Atkinson is a very celebrated author, and this was, in fact, one of the big city read texts a few years ago. So this book covers the experiences of a character called Ruby Lennox, a girl from a working class English family living in York. And it's a book which takes the major events of the 20th century in Britain, such as World War II, the invention of the NHS, the government of Margaret Thatcher, and it explores the ways in which these things are experienced by Ruby and her family. It tells these micro stories that take place within these macro narratives, these tiny histories of real people at street level, and then situating them within these much bigger national and sometimes even global events. And significantly for us this evening, it's a novel set in York, and I think that's significant. And I wanted to use this video actually to focus in on a quote very near the beginning of the book, right at the well, in the early pages of the novel. And in this extract, I think Atkinson sets up a lot of what she's interested in this novel, but also puts into play quite a lot of ideas that I hope that we can explore and that will have resonances throughout the rest of this session. So I'll start by just reading the extract. The shop, a pet shop, is in one of the ancient streets that cower beneath the looming dominance of York Minster. In this street lived the first printers and stained glass craftsmen that filled the windows of the city with coloured light. The 9th Legion of Spanner that conquered the north marched up and down our street, the Via Praetoria of their great fort, before they disappeared into thin air. Guy Fawkes was born here. Dick Turpin's was hung a few streets away. And Robinson Crusoe, that other great hero, is also a native son of this city. Who is to say which of these is real and which is fiction? The streets seethe with history. So right from the first sentence there, we have reference to these ancient streets. And there's that weird play between the present and the past. Not only is this shop inhabiting the present, but it's a present that's perpetually displaced by all this history. This is a city, you know, if you live here, you're well aware of this. This is a city where the Starbucks is a Georgian bank, where the Ask Italian restaurant is inside an 18th century assembly rooms. And that's reflected as well in that first sentence by the looming dominance of York Minster, a great big minster, a Gothic object, which is perpetually imposing itself on the city. It's imposing the city's past on the present. The Minster looms, it's dominant. The Minster, like history in York, is inescapable. And then in that next sentence, Atkinson invites us to imagine all of these different people from all of these different times inhabiting this same space, this one street. The only thing that's different is that they're in different points in history. If you remove time from this description, suddenly Ruby's shop would be standing on the street alongside 18th century printers, medieval craftsmen, and even Romans. And then towards the end of the extract, you've got references there to Guy Fawkes and Dick Turpin, both real historical figures, but figures who have become something else over time. They've become myths, they've become legends, and you need only go down to York Dungeons to see what I mean. And in that same sentence, the same sentence you get Guy Fawkes and Dick Turpin, you also get Robinson Crusoe, a native son of this city. Now, of course, Robinson Crusoe never existed, but his legend is as big as, if not arguably bigger than, that of Guy Fawkes, and certainly bigger than that of Dick Turpin. And perhaps significantly, the author of the novel that originated Robinson Crusoe, Daniel Defoe, he didn't tell his readers that he'd invented Robinson Crusoe. He let them believe that when they were reading that novel, they were reading Crusoe's own words. It says on the cover of that novel that it's his story told by himself. And he made it all seem plausible by saying that Robinson Crusoe was from York. Now, his main readership were readers in London who were aware of York as somewhere, you know, that was a relatively civilized city, but one that was far away up north. So by situating the novel in York, he situates it in a place that's like London, but far away, a place where the story couldn't be verified, a place where something surprising and strange might happen. And Defoe left his London-based readers to ponder the same question that we might plausibly ask now, the same question that Atkinson is playfully asking here. Who is to say which of these is real and which is fiction, because in York, it's hard to say. In his travelogue, a tour through England and Wales, Daniel Defoe actually described York, and I love this. He described York as a city sunk in time. And you get that again here in Atkinson's quote: the streets seethe with history. And it's an interesting image, like the city is full of wounds and the history is seething out. It can't be contained. And the history then contaminates all aspects of the city and also our understanding of the city. York is less a functioning place and more a living archive of all this history, all these stories. It's Behind the Scenes at the Museum is a book about the mess of history of both a micro and macro scale. It takes York as its setting, I think, because York is a city where history doesn't stay in the past. In fact, massive spoiler alert, York is the museum of Atkinson's title. And the novel begins here in the museum gardens. I don't know if you can remember what it used to be like when the museum gardens were open and you're allowed to go inside, but it used to look like this. And it starts here, and then the novel goes on to reveal all of these micro histories from in and around York, leaving the protagonist to conclude that in the end, all life ever can really be is stories. The stories we hear, the stories we tell and retell, the stories that saturate the ancient streets of an ancient city like York. But what actually is a museum, and how can a city be one? Well, here's a definition of a museum. A museum is a building where a large number of interesting and valuable objects, such as works of art or historical items, are kept, studied, and displayed to the public. And the word display is doing a lot of work there, because a museum isn't just the objects, it's the effort to present those objects in a way that the public can understand and engage with them. The museum is an invitation to imagine yourself in the situations of the people who handled or produced the objects you're looking at. It's an invitation to interpret. And to live and work or study in York is to be constantly bombarded with similar invitations, to imagine what it's like to have been a Tudor family living in Barley Hall, or to imagine what it's like to be Vikings marching around the city, or to imagine what it's like to be Romans marching around Eboracum, or what it's like to be in a Viking tavern drinking mead from a horn. We're constantly being invited to interpret this history and to empathize with the past, and in a way to perform that past. So that, in that sense, according to Atkinson, York could be seen as a kind of museum. So if you've read Behind the Scenes at the Museum, feel free to tell us your thoughts on this. If you haven't, feel free to tell us what your thoughts are on what I just said, or of what you think of this idea of York as a kind of museum, and what that might mean for literature that chooses York as its location, a place where time is out of joint, a place obsessed with the performance of its own history, a place perhaps where nothing is ever really real. Look forward to reading your comments. Thanks for listening.